Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Kari and today I am doing my April historical events video. So for today, or for April rather, I chose the birth of Hans Christian Andersen on April 2nd, 1805. He, if you weren't aware, is the author of fairy tales, specifically the fairy tales that we know and love that are a little bit less dark than Grimm's fairy tales. That said, let's get into the books. So the first one is actually Grimm's Fairy Tales that I'm going to be recommending today, simply because if you haven't read Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales, you at least know the general story. So most of the books today are going to be retellings or different variations of fairy tales, hence Grimm's Fairy Tales. They are definitely dark, but I've read the complete collection and I think they're just highly entertaining, because you have the stepsisters and Cinderella cutting off parts of their feet, and people are incredibly unobservant, but like I said, dark and greatly entertaining. The next one is The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh. This is the one book out of this video that I have not actually read, but I really want to read it. I've heard mixed reviews on it, so I'll let you know when I actually get around to reading it. It is a retelling of the 1001 Nights fairy tale. As far as I'm aware, in this book, a young woman is chosen for marriage and they all end up dead in the morning, and so she finds a way out of that by telling him a different story every night, or the extension of the same story. There might be some variations on that plot within here because I haven't read the book yet, obviously, but that is the general basis of it, and I am really excited to get into it in a month or so. The next book is The Forgotten Book by Mechtilde Glaser. This is the second in, or sort of companion book to her book that came out last year, which was The Book Jumper. And this one is not strictly speaking a retelling of any fairy tale. I chose this book because it has a very almost Beauty and the Beast feel to it in the myth or the legend that grows up in the south of Germany where this story takes place. Like I said, it's not strictly speaking a fairy tale retelling, but it had that feeling, and that's why I'm including it. This book follows a young girl who is at boarding school in the south of Germany in a forest, and she finds a book. She starts writing in the book and realizes that those things come true, although not necessarily in a way that she anticipated or wanted. Everything blows up from there, and you follow her as she tries to figure out exactly what this book is and how it works. I absolutely adored this book. One, because I think the writing style, the translation evolved quite a bit in this one, and second of all, the cover is just stunning. So if you want a quick read, I definitely recommend this one. Next up is a series of 6 books, which is The Land of Stories. This is the first book, The Wishing Spell by Chris Colfer. This is honestly just a fairy tale retelling story. There are 2 kids, Alex and Bailey, and they find out in the first book that they can jump between the fairy tale world and our world. This leads to a whole bunch of hijinks, and there's magic and Mother Goose and Fairy Godmother, all the characters that you love, all in one world, and then Alex and Bailey switch between. Throughout the 6 books you follow them as they fight off people in both our world and the fairy tale world that are trying to destroy whatever it is in that particular book. This was just a fun series. I liked probably the first 2 books the best because they seemed to leave you on a cliffhanger a little bit less. The last 4 books are really part of a series where you are left with many, many questions at the end of each book, and you have to go to the end to find out what happens. So if you don't mind cliffhangers or you don't mind series, then absolutely try this series because it is really fun and it's well written. The next one is a recent buy of mine, and that is The Girl in the Tower by Katherine Arden. Funny story about this one, I didn't realize this was part of a series. Apparently this is the second book, the first one being The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden, which has blown up booktube for the last month or 2. Apparently it's fantastic, but that one didn't sound all that interesting to me. However, when I picked this one up, not realizing that it was the same author or part of a series, this one sounded really interesting to me, and so I picked it up and I read it and I loved it. I am going to go back and get this first book now so I can figure out and fill in some of the gaps. That said, this does actually work pretty well as a standalone. It is not even a retelling of a fairy tale, it's just a bit of an adaptation of an old Russian myth. There's a Russian myth about a sorcerer and some celestial beings, basically. In this story we follow Vasya as she leaves home and basically ends up entangled in a lot of these celestial doings. It's a really fun read, it's a quick read, and the descriptions are just so vivid. You can tell it was incredibly well researched. I didn't know much about Russian fairy tale or folklore before this, but this has definitely piqued my interest. And then the last book, which is a standalone, but it's part of a series called The 500 Kingdoms by Mercedes Lackey. This one is The Snow Queen. And these books are retellings of fairy tales. This one obviously retells the story of the Snow Queen, which is, you know, frozen, more or less. And I haven't read this book in a while, but I love Mercedes Lackey. She also wrote Beauty and the Werewolf and The Fairy Godmother. You don't have to read them in order, but it does help if you read The Fairy Godmother first, and then you can read the rest of them in whatever order you want. So she takes different pieces of different fairy tales, basically, and puts them all together in a very different way. The one she has about Sleeping Beauty takes Sleeping Beauty and I think Snow White and combines them. This one, if I remember correctly, is more so specifically about the Snow Queen and why she became that way, what she does afterwards, and how it all works out. Again, I love Mercedes Lackey, so I'm always recommending her books. Those are all the books I have to talk about the birth of Hans Christian Andersen over 200 years ago. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a big thumbs up down below, and if you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button down below. As always, I'll leave my Goodreads linked in the description box if you want to check out what I read. Until my next video, bye!